I'm joined by Elena Casas. Morning to you again,
Morning
Elena.
again, Tom.
So, the focus very much on Libya and how to rule the country post-Gaddafi. What are the analysts saying about that?
Well, on all the front pages, it's Libya and more Libya, as you would expect. But yeah, we're looking forward now in a lot of the papers to what exactly is going to happen now that the regime is gone. Let's look at a piece from the Egyptian blog, The Arabist, that's been reprinted in today's Guardian. Now, it's from a journalist who's been in Benghazi since the start of the conflict. So he's watched the rebel administration take place there, and he's analysing what's going to happen when their administration is spread out across the country. Now, he says there are a number of factors against them creating a stable government, including the number of privately organised militias who, once they don't have a common enemy to fight against, might all decide they want some profit of their own out of the fall of Gaddafi's regime and turn on each other. There's also, of course, the assassination last month of rebel commander Abdel Fattah Yunus, which doesn't look particularly good for the rebels. It's created factionalism, he says, with lots of rebels in and around Benghazi finding the National Transitional Council responsible for his death, and they may refuse to either demobilise or join a united Libyan army, he says. So that could prove a problem. There's also the tribes who backed Gaddafi and fears there'll be reprisal attacks against them, and the fact that Libya doesn't have much experience of party politics, so they have to create a democracy where no foundations exist. He's still optimistic, though, about the future of Libya. Why? Well, there's a few reasons. He says the foreign airstrikes have given the West some leverage without creating any backlash. So if they need foreign support, UN support to help them build up new institutions, the rebels are likely to be favourable to that. And also, when the rebel prime minister says that they mustn't loot or commit reprisals because the eyes of the world are on them, the rebel fighters do understand his logic. So he says we can be optimistic for the future of Libya.
All right, but one major factor that really dented the rebels' credibility was the sudden reappearance of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the high-profile son of the country's leader of 42 years. What are the papers making of that?
Well, the New York Times takes a look at this today and the general miasma of disinformation, conflicting information and downright lies that we've had coming out of Libya. They ask just why the truth has been so swamped by contradictory information. And they say the country was long a republic of lies. Endless, obviously bizarre stories told by Gaddafi were accepted by the public as truth because they were so numbed by the oppression, the paper says. And if the rebels sound like Gaddafi, then maybe that's not surprising because he's the only leader that most of them have ever known. There's also the simple fact that the fog of war makes the situation on the ground so confusing. Even in an age of Twitter and rolling news channels, it's impossible to know, the paper says, what's really going on in the heat of a war. They say there's been plenty of deliberate misinformation on both sides as well. Gaddafi saying the rebels were on drugs and the rebels were saying Gaddafi was using African mercenaries, when actually there's no proof that the Africans who've been detained by the rebels actually were mercenaries, or if they were just foreign workers in the wrong place at the wrong time. So the New York Times says that the truth has become collateral damage of the conflict in Libya.
Absolutely, verifying fact, an impossible task for us here. Another big question, what role, and we've touched on this already, what role should the West be playing in Libya's reconstruction? That's making the press as well.
It is. The Huffington Post has an interesting piece by Claire Short, who was the former British Secretary for International Development. So she was in charge of the British role in the reconstruction of Iraq back then, and she's saying what lessons were taken from that experience that should now be applied in Libya. She says fundamentally the lesson is that if outside powers try to dominate and control the reconstruction, resentment will grow and things will go wrong. She says the country's weak national institutions and tribal differences that were exploited by Gaddafi to divide and rule do mean some foreign support will be needed. But if foreigners think that they know better what should happen to Libya than Libyans, then disaster will happen.
All right, and another big story we're all following here at France 24, Dominic Strauss-Kahn, his case has been dismissed in New York. What are the papers saying about that?
Let's look at a piece in today's Guardian by their American columnist Hadley Freeman, which is an interesting counterpoint to what some of the French articles I was looking at in the French press review this morning were saying. She points to the fact that even if Nafissatou Diallo told lies in the past about her immigration status, it's irrelevant to this case. She says the prosecutor doesn't believe she's a good victim, that's why he's dropped the case. But it's the women who aren't good victims that are the most vulnerable. Women who are immigrants and poor are the most at risk of rape, and it's those who need to be protected. Now, her final sentence is pretty strong in this piece, but it really merits being read out in full. She says, what's been proved is that only women who've led lives as sheltered as Rapunzel and have memory recall as robotic as computers are apparently capable of being raped. According to the prosecutor, the rest are money-grabbing sluts with vaginal bruising.
Goodness me. All right, well, Elena Casas, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to date.
Thank you.
Time for a quick check of our top stories. Taking